My neighbor filed a lawsuit claiming my tree roots damaged his driveway. In court, he presented photos of cracks. I quietly revealed the contractor's report showing the cracks were caused by his poor construction. His lawyer said, "We're dropping the case." I live in a quiet neighborhood in Seattle, where the houses are old, the trees are older, and most people mind their own business. I've been here for over a decade, and in all that time, I've never had a problem with a single neighbor, until he moved in. Let's call him Brad. Brad was the kind of guy who acted like he owned the entire block. He threw loud parties, parked his car halfway across my driveway, and constantly complained about the smallest things. But his biggest problem? My trees. I have 2 massive maple trees in my front yard, and they'd been here for longer than I've been alive. They provide shade, look beautiful in the fall, and make the whole street feel welcoming. Brad hated them. At first, it was just little comments. He'd complain about the leaves blowing into his yard. He'd mutter about how much of his lawn was in the shade. One time, he actually walked over and demanded I cut them down because they block my view. I told him no. That should have been the end of it. One morning, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find a guy in a suit handing me an envelope. "You've been served." Brad was suing me. He claimed my tree roots had grown under his driveway and caused severe damage. His lawsuit demanded that I either remove the trees or pay thousands of dollars in damages. I was stunned. Brad had never even mentioned driveway damage to me before. And my trees? They weren't anywhere near his driveway. But inside the lawsuit were pictures, photos of cracks running through the concrete, some of them pretty big. It looked bad. I won't lie, for a split second I panicked. I didn't have the kind of money to throw at some ridiculous lawsuit. If a judge ruled against me, I could be on the hook for thousands. But then I took a closer look. Those cracks? I'd seen them before. They were there before Brad even moved in. And suddenly, I wasn't panicked anymore. I was pissed. I started doing my own research. I talked to a few neighbors, and that's when I got my first big piece of information. Brad had repaved his driveway himself. A woman across the street remembered seeing him out there one weekend, laying down some kind of cheap resurfacing mix. Another neighbor said he had overheard Brad bragging about how he saved money by skipping the professional job and doing it all himself. I kept digging. I hired a certified arborist to inspect my trees and their roots. The report came back crystal clear. My trees were healthy, and their roots were not under Brad's driveway. Then I hired a contractor to inspect the cracks. His findings were even better. The cracks had started from underneath, not from surface damage. Brad had used a cheap DIY resurfacing kit that wasn't meant for driveways. The driveway was uneven and had been poorly leveled, which caused it to break apart. In short, Brad's driveway was falling apart because he did a terrible job fixing it. My trees had nothing to do with it. Now I had proof. The day of the hearing, I arrived early. Brad walked in a few minutes later, wearing a smug grin. He actually winked at me like he'd already won. His lawyer started with a dramatic speech about how much damage my trees had caused. He held up the pictures, pointed at the cracks, and made it sound like my trees had ripped Brad's driveway apart overnight. Then Brad got up to speak. He played the victim, talking about how much money he had spent trying to repair the damage. He claimed that he had no choice but to take legal action because I had refused to be a reasonable neighbor. It was all complete bullshit. Then it was my turn. I walked up, handed the judge the arborist's report, and watched as she read through it. Then I handed over the contractor's findings. Silence. I turned to Brad's lawyer. "My trees didn't cause these cracks," I said. "His driveway is falling apart because he cut corners and used the wrong materials." Brad's face went pale. His lawyer flipped through the papers, and I saw his expression change. And then, the moment I had been waiting for, Brad's lawyer turned to him and whispered something. Brad's smug look was gone. His hands were gripping the table so hard his knuckles turned white. His lawyer cleared his throat and said, We're dropping the case." I didn't say a word. I just sat back down. But this wasn't over yet. Brad stormed out of the courtroom without looking at me. His lawyer trailed behind him, whispering in a way that told me Brad had just wasted a whole lot of money for nothing. I should have felt satisfied. The case was over, my trees were safe, and Brad had just embarrassed himself in front of a judge. But something about the way he left nagged at me. This wasn't a guy who took losing well. At first, things were quiet. Too quiet. Brad stopped making eye contact whenever we saw each other. No more snide remarks, no more complaints about leaves on his lawn. Then little things started happening. One morning, I walked outside to find trash scattered across my yard. At first, I thought maybe a raccoon had gotten into a garbage can, but then I noticed something weird. There was no garbage in my own bin. It wasn't my trash. I checked my security camera. At around 2 a.m., a shadowy figure walked across the street and dumped a full bag of garbage right in front of my house. The footage was grainy, but I could tell by the shape of his car parked nearby exactly who it was. Brad. I should have confronted him right then, but I figured it wasn't worth it. If this was the best he could do, he wasn't going to rattle me. I cleaned up the mess and went about my day. Then it got worse. One morning, I noticed something strange at the base of one of my trees, deep cuts in the bark. Long, jagged gashes, the kind you'd make if you hacked at the trunk with a knife. I ran my hand over the marks. The bark was peeling, and the wounds were fresh. Someone had tried to kill my tree. And I knew exactly who it was. I was furious, but I needed proof. I installed more security cameras, making sure they covered every angle of my yard. I even put a small camera in one of my front windows, aimed directly at the trees. For a week, nothing happened. Then, one night I caught him. It was around 3 a.m. when my phone buzzed. My security system had picked up movement. I opened the live feed and saw Brad standing at the base of my tree, holding a hatchet. My heart pounded as I watched him take a swing, then another. He was trying to kill my trees out of spite. I grabbed my phone and called the police. They arrived fast. By the time they pulled up, Brad was already speed-walking back to his house, trying to pretend he hadn't just been caught red-handed. The cops shined a flashlight on the fresh cuts. It was obvious what he had been doing. One officer knocked on Brad's door. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, the lights flicked on inside. The door creaked open an inch, and Brad peeked out, acting half asleep. "What's going on?" he mumbled. The officer didn't buy his act. "Sir, we need to talk about why you were outside with an axe in the middle of the night." Brad tried to deny it. "Wasn't me." Then I spoke up. "I have it on video." Brad's face dropped. But he wasn't done fighting yet. The police made Brad step outside. He crossed his arms, scowling, acting like this was all just some big misunderstanding. "Let's see the video," the officer said. I pulled out my phone and hit play. On the screen, Brad was right there, standing by my tree, hatchet in hand, swinging at the trunk. The video was clear. Too clear. The cops knew it. Brad knew it. The moment the officer looked back up at him, Brad's entire attitude changed. He threw up his hands. Okay, look, he stuttered, scrambling for an excuse. "I wasn't trying to kill the tree. I was just testing the wood. You know, checking for rot. A community service type thing." The officer gave him a look. "At 3 in the morning?" Brad hesitated. I couldn't sleep." It was pathetic. "Sir, this is vandalism," the cop said. "And depending on the damage, possibly destruction of property." Brad's face twitched. I could see the wheels turning in his head, scrambling for a way out. Then he did something I didn't expect. He suddenly got cocky. "You can't arrest me for this," he said, smirking. "That tree's on the edge of your property. I could argue it's my tree too." The cop frowned and turned to me. "Is that true?" For a second, my stomach clenched. I didn't know the exact property line down to the inch. If Brad could argue that the tree was partially his, he might be able to weasel out of this. And then I remembered something. I turned, walked into my garage, and came back with a printed copy of the property survey I had pulled when I first bought the house. I unfolded it in front of the officer. "The tree," I said, tapping the paper, "is entirely on my land." The cop scanned the document. Then he turned back to Brad. "You want to try another excuse?" Brad clenched his jaw so tight I thought his teeth might crack. The police didn't arrest him, not yet. But they did file a report. I made sure to press charges for property damage. I thought that would be the end of it. That maybe, finally, Brad would back off. I was wrong. The very next morning, I woke up to find a for sale sign staked into his front yard. For a second, I felt relief. Maybe this idiot had realized he lost and was getting out of here. But then, I saw something else. A city inspector's truck was parked in his driveway. I watched from my window as the inspector walked up, clipboard in hand. A few minutes later, Brad came outside, already yelling. I stepped onto my porch, just in time to hear Brad shout. "You can't do this!" "Who reported me?" The inspector said something I couldn't hear, then pointed toward Brad's house. And that's when it hit me. Brad wasn't just selling his house. He was being forced to. I started asking around. It didn't take long to get the full story. Apparently, Brad's house had a lot of problems he had been covering up. He had done illegal renovations. No permits. No inspections. Nothing was up to code. His DIY driveway disaster? That was just the tip of the iceberg. His foundation was cracked. His electrical wiring was a nightmare, full of hazards. His basement flooded every time it rained. And now someone, probably another neighbor who hated him just as much as I did, had tipped off the city. An official investigation was underway. Brad wasn't selling because he wanted to. He was selling because he had to. But what I didn't know yet was that Brad still had one last move. And it was about to turn everything upside down. Brad's house was under investigation. The city inspectors were crawling all over his property, and word spread fast. Every neighbor knew about the illegal renovations, the flooding basement, and the electrical issues. At first, Brad tried to play it off. He told people it was just a misunderstanding. But then the official violations came in. Fines. Repair orders. A warning that, unless he fixed everything, his house could be condemned. Brad was in deep. He didn't have the money to fix it, and he was running out of time. That's when he did something desperate. One evening, just before sunset, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find Brad standing there, looking different. No smug grin. No crossed arms. Just tired eyes and slumped shoulders. "Can we talk?" he asked. I almost laughed. "Talk? You sued me, tried to destroy my trees, and vandalized my yard. Why would I want to talk?" Brad exhaled slowly. "Look, I screwed up. I get that. But I need a favor." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "A favor?" He swallowed hard. "I need to sell my house. Fast. And I need a clean record to do it." I narrowed my eyes. "Meaning?" "I'll pay for the tree damage. I'll even put it in writing. But in return, I need you to drop the charges." I stared at him, not sure if I was more shocked or amused. This man had spent months making my life miserable, and now he wanted me to save him? Why would I do that? I asked. Brad looked at his feet. "Because if I can't sell, I lose everything." Something inside me snapped. "You already lost everything, Brad. You did that to yourself. You lied to the court. You tried to kill my trees. You trashed my yard in the middle of the night like some high school bully. And now that it's blowing up in your face, you think I should just let it go." Brad's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists. "I made mistakes, okay? But you're not perfect either. You..." I cut him off. "Don't. You don't get to turn this around on me." For the first time since I met him, Brad had nothing to say. He stood there, breathing heavily, shoulders shaking. Then, finally, his face crumpled. "This house was supposed to be a fresh start," he muttered. "I was drowning in debt, and I thought, if I fixed it up myself, saved some money, I could flip it, make something of it. But everything just kept going wrong. And then you." He stopped himself, shaking his head. I let the silence hang between us. I wasn't sure what I had expected. More lies? More excuses? But standing there, seeing him like that, broken, humiliated, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. I didn't drop the charges. But I did agree to one thing: if he paid for the tree damage and agreed to leave quietly, I wouldn't push for further legal action. I could have dragged it out, made things worse for him, but honestly, I was tired. A week later, the "for sale" sign changed to "under contract." Brad was gone by the end of the month. Nobody threw a goodbye party. For a while, I kept expecting another shoe to drop. Another lawsuit. Another passive-aggressive stunt. But nothing ever came. One afternoon, I stood in my yard, looking up at my trees, the same ones Brad had tried so hard to get rid of. They were still there. Strong. Unbothered. And maybe that was the real victory. Brad had tried to tear something down that had been standing for decades. And in the end, he was the one who fell apart. I learned something from all of this. Some people build. Some people destroy. And some people, like my trees, just keep standing.